Greetings, families. Welcome back once again. Thank you so much for clicking on this video. This video is about a month or maybe 3 weeks. Let me just leave it that way. It's about the Prime Minister of Senegal when he came to Burkina Faso to help his brothers celebrate also the inauguration ceremony about Captain Thomas Sankara. Yes, he has given a speech. I work on it, put it aside, because if you remember why that was going on, our president was opening factories, building them, and a lot. And so I put it aside. But it has a lot of information that we need to listen to. And so I decided to share it today with you. Families, please listen carefully, and I'll be back. Thank you for your time.
Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. Thank you for welcoming us into your home for this special interview. RTB, the channel at the heart of major events, is hosting for you tonight a distinguished African figure born in Thiès, the capital of the railway and crossroads of West Africa. He is a graduate of the prestigious National School of Administration of Senegal. He entered the political arena in 2014 under the banner of PASTEF, Patriots of Senegal for Ethics, Work and Fraternity. At the head of this party, he made discipline and integrity the core of his priorities. His message of change, advocating for a free and dignified Senegal and Africa, has mobilized the youth. Elected as a member of parliament in 2017, his party caused a surprise by coming in third in the 2019 presidential election. He was prevented from running as a candidate in the 2024 presidential election, but under his leadership, PASTEF won the presidential vote in the first round. Bassirou Diomaye Faye was elected president of the Republic of Senegal and appointed him as prime minister. As you may have guessed, tonight we are joined by His Excellency Ousmane Sonko, Prime Minister of Senegal. Good evening, Mr. Prime Minister.
Good evening, Mr. Boubacar.
So you are in Ouagadougou for the inauguration of the Thomas Sankara mausoleum. First of all, how do you feel about the construction of this mausoleum in memory of the father of the August 83 revolution?
Thank you. First, if you'll allow me, I would like to once again express how pleased I am to be here today on the soil of Faso, a people and a country I have always admired. And to thank all the authorities for the warm welcome we have received since this morning, from the airport to the reception with the President of Faso. And for all the attention we have been given since this morning. It is a pleasure to be here. And I think that the National Television of Faso owes me something as well, because this is the first interview I've given to a foreign television station in 3 years. That shows you how important this visit is to me. A visit that has a double meaning. First of all, as you mentioned, I came at the invitation of my counterpart, the Prime Minister of Faso, to whom I had first expressed my wish to come for a working visit. And he responded by suggesting this date, which actually coincided with the second purpose of my visit, the inauguration of the mausoleum of one of the greatest men Africa has ever produced, who has been a role model for all of us since our early childhood, namely President Thomas Sankara. And I seized the opportunity because the timing could not have been better to be here today. And we actually began discussions in a more or less informal manner. There will be an intergovernmental meeting to address and review the cooperation between the two states. This inauguration is of great importance to us. Everyone who has followed me over the years has had the regular references I have made to Thomas Sankara in my speeches and also in my writings. This is not demagoguery. I believe that he is a man who contributed greatly to Africa, who was certainly perhaps a bit ahead of his time, but who still inspires us today in the dual aspect of his struggle. The dimension of sovereignty and patriotism, which is extremely important, but also the aspect of rigorous and serious management of the state with simplicity in order to serve the people. And that's why it's important for me to be here today. And through my presence, to represent His Excellency, the President of the Republic, Bassirou Diomaye Faye, as well as the entire Senegalese people.
All right, precisely. What does President Thomas Sankara represent to you?
Based on a certain number of observations related to internal concerns within Senegal, but also much broader observations regarding Africa's relationship with the rest of the world. Obviously, two concepts took on particular importance in our initial analysis that led to the creation of the party. The notion of patriotism, which concerns Senegal as a people, as a nation, as a state, and the notion of sovereignty, which refers to Pan-Africanism in its most fluid form. Obviously, Africa is not a homogeneous reality. We shouldn't fool ourselves into thinking that as soon as we talk about Africa, it's as if it's a single reality. It is a continent that from east to west and north to south has its own specificities. But it is a continent that at its core shares a certain number of common characteristics, regardless of the minor differences. And in this second respect, a number of political leaders truly inspire our reflections, but also in some way guide our actions. Certainly there is President Thomas Sankara, but there are other leaders like Patrice Lumumba, like Mamadou Dia in Senegal, who is actually one of our strongest references. You saw that recently President Diomaye renamed the largest avenue in our country to give it the name of President Mamadou Dia. Certainly others as well, next to. There are so many leaders who inspire us. Of course, we draw inspiration from them, but we adapt it to our own context. The contexts are not the same, and we can take many of their ideas, their ways of thinking, but by adapting them to our context, to our time, and to the tools we have today. And that is exactly what Thomas Sankara represents. It's not just in political speeches, but also in the actions taken during the short time of his rule to assert the sovereignty of Burkina Faso, to restore the values and traditions that are the foundation of Burkinabe society. That is extremely important for any African today who wants to lead a similar struggle.
Precisely. Do you think that African countries today should draw inspiration from this ideal of sovereignty, from the fight against imperialism embodied by President Thomas Sankara in order to move forward?
You know, it would be very presumptuous of me to speak on behalf of all of Africa, and I would surely come across as someone giving lessons. I can speak about Senegal with great ease. I can, with a great deal of humility, make suggestions for the rest of Africa. And I think we must take action, since we have been told that we are independent states. This independence, we wrested it one way or another. Some had to fight militarily, I would even say physically. Others had to wage political struggles to achieve independence. Once we have this independence, it is up to us to give substance to our sovereignty. What is it that made our leaders, or at least a good number of our leaders, continue to accept the dictates and orders coming from elsewhere all these years? This points back to ourselves, to our elites first and foremost, but also, perhaps to a lesser extent, to the people who must take an interest in and get involved in the management of public affairs. And that is why we believe that we need to be much less defensive and instead embody our hard-won independence in a proactive way. That is, by taking very concrete actions and seeing to what extent those actions will be challenged or thwarted by others. From that point on, we could then return to the defensive aspect of sovereignty. And that is why, if I take the example of Senegal, in the year since we have been in power, we have taken actions to assert our sovereignty. As proof of this, consider the issue of military presence. We have said that we cannot allow foreign military bases in Senegal. And for every country that had a military base in Senegal, we have officially notified them, telling them that we are requesting the withdrawal of all their troops from Senegal. this operation has been launched. If you've been following the news, 2 days ago, a military base was vacated and the process will be completed by July, after which Senegal will no longer have any foreign military bases on its soil. We don't need them. For me, it should be a normal thing for a country to say that we are sovereign, we have a national army, we have defense and security forces, and we believe we can manage our own security. And these are just as many actions being taken regarding the management of our natural resources. What is it that has prevented Africa from benefiting from these natural resources the way other regions of the world have, like Asia, the Gulf, Europe, and America? Everyone enjoys these natural resources except Africa. Why? Is there a need for a speech? No. We take action. If there are things that need to be renegotiated, we renegotiate them. We are open to partnerships with the entire world, but they must be fair, balanced, and mutually beneficial. These are the actions that need to be taken and move forward. And I think that we are part of this dynamic. And we hope that this can be the case for all African countries, because the continent must now take its destiny, but above all, by relying first and foremost on itself. I wouldn't dare, in a peremptory or imperative way, to extend this to everyone, but through our words and actions, I can hope to inspire others as well, just as we ourselves are inspired by the good things being done in other African countries.
All right. So, Mr. Prime Minister, one of the issues currently being debated among African youth is the question of the CFA franc. So, what is your perspective on the CFA franc?
Our position on the CFA franc has been very consistent. I am fortunate to be a politician who has written books, and my thoughts are in those books. But my views are also followed through broadcasts and rallies. Our position has always been consistent. The effort to integrate a sub-region, which involves taking strong actions to establish a common market, to have unified tariff regulations, to have a common currency, is a commendable effort. We want an integrated space. We want the most integrated zone possible in West Africa, which could go beyond the UMOA area, but that is what we want. We wish for this because we live in a world where people come together in groups to be stronger, and currency is an extremely important policy tool for a state. Alongside fiscal policy, monetary policy is extremely important. And it's important that the zone manage to establish a common market, to set up a common currency. But there was a problem. The problem is that this currency continued to symbolize in some way a colonial presence, no matter what people say. And we consider that this currency, stripped of those elements, once again became a currency of Africans, by Africans and for Africans. There are symbolic aspects, such as the name of the currency, even though the CFA 1960 no longer really means the same as the CFA 1900. The mere fact that we still talk about the CFA is problematic. That's one element, but it's one of the less important aspects, and it's symbolic. After all, currency is a tool, as I said, of public policy. The question we are asking ourselves is this currency, as it exists today, suited to our development choices? The direction we want to take should depend on the answer to that question. The CFA currency, pegged to the euro and the eurozone, seems to be too strong a currency for our economies, which keeps us as importing countries, consuming what is produced elsewhere, but does not make us very competitive when we want to reverse the trend. Yet, the logic in our countries is to move toward an import substitution policy. This is, among other things, one of the economic criticisms. There are many others, notably the lack of flexibility and many other aspects. From that point on, it is the response we give to these technical considerations that will determine our decision to go in one direction or another. And we have said, ever since my 2018 book, when I was a candidate for the presidential election, up to President Abbassi Diomaye's 2024 program, we have remained consistent We are part of a system that has its advantages, but also its drawbacks. We will raise the debate with our partners to say that we need to move forward. If a solution is found within this framework, so much the better. There is no reason. But if that is not the case, we will take responsibility. And we are still following this approach. When we arrived, the BCAO, which is the joint institution, presented us with the work they have done, which goes exactly in the direction of what we mentioned earlier. It is now up to the presidents to meet in order to validate a certain number of options. That is the political aspect. The technical experts have done their work. And we hope that the presidents will convene, will make decisions, and will allow us to take a significant step toward the full and final ownership of our currency so that we can have a monetary instrument and a monetary policy, which is not currently the case. That is why we are always forced to refocus on our budgetary policies given the tensions we are experiencing. That is our position. We remain consistent. There is a lot of confusion being created. Yes, they were the ones who said they would come out. A state must be managed responsibly, and above all, we are Pan-Africanists. Everything we can do to maintain cohesion, we will do. But if we realize that things are not going in the right direction and that it is not good for us, Pan-Africanism also has its limits. It cannot be done at the expense of the interests of the states. From that point on, we will take full responsibility regarding this currency.
Mr. Prime Minister, economic integration in East Africa is currently facing difficulties. ECOWAS currently has 12 member countries. After the withdrawal of the AES countries, how did you experience, or how are you experiencing this split between ECOWAS and the AES?
With much regret, we have to be honest. You can't call yourself a Pan-Africanist and wish for the fragile unions we struggle to build to fall apart. I don't think the AES countries did it gladly. I don't think the rest of ECOWAS accepted it gladly either. Unions are first and foremost the coming together of peoples before they are the coming together of leaders. And the people will continue to be peoples of ECOWAS. No matter what anyone says, just because 3 countries have left ECOWAS doesn't mean there is a total opaque break and that there are no longer any commercial, economic, or even social relations. Because on both sides of the borders, it is often the same populations with the same ethnic groups who live there. And our region is destined to live together. We are bound by history, by geography. We have no choice. Now, there are political situations that present themselves to us. Mistakes have been made. We have to call things as they are. I have no comment to make on the decision. During his last statement on the matter, President Diomaye Faye called for respecting the decision of the countries of the Alliance of Sahel states. It's just a way of speaking. Whether we like it or not, whether we respect it or not, these are sovereign states making their own decisions. Mistakes were made from the start, and I think mainly by ECOWAS, in the way a number of situations were handled. I said it when I was in the opposition, and I'm saying it again today. I'm not saying things to please the AES countries or to please ECOWAS. I'm not concerned with those considerations. Unfortunately, we're caught in a kind of black and white thinking where more and more the narrative is you're either with me or against me. You can agree on 80%, 90% of things, but as soon as there's a single issue where opinions differ than just one you, become the enemy. That's not how it should be. Today, we need to rise to the level of responsibility that our positions demand of us. I'm not trying to please one side or the other. I remain true to my beliefs. I say that from the very beginning, there have been problems. When the takeover happened in Mali, I was the first to send a message of absolute support. It was the same here in Burkina Faso. When the takeover happened in Niger, I was in detention, but I still managed to post a statement on my Facebook page, not only to show my support, but also to firmly oppose ECOWAS's threats at the time to intervene militarily. These are things that are hard to understand. The embargo that was imposed on Mali is unacceptable. And a country like Senegal should never have done that. In any case, if we had been in power, we would never have accepted it. These problems cannot be solved in this way, intervene militarily in a country, when you haven't done enough to help it deal with the security issues. An organization must establish rules that it can enforce for everyone. If today the same situation were to happen in Nigeria, would ECOWAS threaten to intervene militarily? All ECOWAS member countries are countries of equal dignity. Many mistakes have been made, and we denounced them when we were in the opposition, and we continue to denounce them. But despite everything, family problems are resolved within the family. Some people have had much deeper problems. Some people have fought wars that turned into world wars with tens of millions of deaths. And today, they are in integrated spaces to face the rest of the world. And it is in this sense that we said our wish is for the region not to break apart. Because even if it does break apart, we will continue to work together. Take the case of Burkina and Senegal. We have 20 cooperation agreements signed and ratified. There are 23 more that are currently under discussion. Do you think that just because Burkina is no longer in ECOWAS that will stop? No. We will continue and maybe even increase our cooperation. These spaces are political spaces, political frameworks. But what happens between the states and the people will continue. And we hope, by respecting each other's choices, and I hope that ECOWAS will draw all the necessary conclusions so that in addressing the root of the issue, as I always said, you cannot ignore the real causes of an illness and just focus on the symptoms. If there is a coup d'etat, what led to the coup d'etat? And why is it that when people manipulate constitutions, ECOWAS says nothing? When people oppress the opposition, ECOWAS says nothing. It's only when certain situations arise that statements are released, embargoes are imposed, and there are threats of military intervention. It is these mistakes that have led us to this point. And I hope that ECOWAS will learn from this, draw all the necessary lessons, and above all, have the openness required to treat all states equally. There are no big or small states here, etc. Perhaps on this note, I do not wish sooner or later for reconciliation to happen just because we share a common destiny.
Precisely. President Diomaye Faye and his counterpart from Togo have been appointed by ECOWAS to lead a mediation. Do you think the positions are still reconcilable?
The positions are always reconcilable. History is made up of separations and reunions. Sometimes these separations are very painful, which have certainly led at times to wars and so on, and then to reunions. It could be now, in 10 years, or in 100 years, only God knows. But first, regarding the mediation, I think President Faye acted in good faith. Many people, even within public opinion, a certain segment of public opinion, not everyone in the brother countries of the S, as soon as President Dioma was appointed mediator, immediately wanted to associate him with or even blame him for what happened. I would like to remind you that all of this, we did not find it when we came to power. Perhaps those who appointed the mediator felt that they themselves were already sufficiently challenged or singled out to be able to serve as the solution. And that's why they considered that Senegal, which had just come to power with a certain vigilance, might be able to succeed. In this case, they succeeded. But this is absolutely not a case of Senegal taking a position against X or for Y. Senegal is not involved in those kinds of games. And he did so with all the goodwill in the world, with all due respect to everyone, because that is also the diplomatic identity of Senegal. But as soon as it said that the will and choices of the countries of the S must be respected, we all have to draw the conclusion that perhaps it considers it has done what it could. He will certainly, or perhaps has already reported back to his ECOWAS peers, but as I said, that does not mean the story is over. Bilateral relations will continue. And certainly, time will tell us what will happen. But even if it is maintained, I would say that ultimately, it is not the most important thing. Let me give you an example. If the countries of the S leave ECOWAS, theoretically, what would they lose? They would no longer be part of the common market and they would no longer They would no longer share a certain number of common benefits in terms of ease of movement, in terms of travel documents, etc., etc. But fundamentally, the ECOWAS that we have all ratified offers exactly the same advantages within the space, within the much broader African space. And what is being highlighted here, in the case of ECOWAS, is particularly the political dimension of ECOWAS. The political dimension. Before we got to ECOWAS, the initial formulation did not have these political aspects, where all the countries could take an interest in what was happening politically in another country and intervene. Back then, it was the market aspect, the economic aspect that was prioritized. What is being challenged today by the countries of the ES is that at a certain point, the political dimension of ECOWAS was set in motion to the extent of wanting to impose sanctions against those countries. I think that the natural course of events will clarify things for us, but I don't see any significant impact or possible consequences from this separation in terms of cooperation between the countries or in the region as a whole.
All right. So, Mr. Prime Minister, one of the arguments put forward by the AES countries for leaving ECOWAS is, if we can put it this way, the lack of support in the face of the security crisis in the fight against terrorism. So today, in your opinion, how can the Sahel therefore manage to contain this security crisis in the Sahel?
First, allow me to once again express my full solidarity with our friends and brothers in the Sahel. This is not just a crisis of the Sahel, it is a crisis affecting Africa as a whole, and West Africa in particular. None of us will come out of this unscathed, and in one way or another, we are all under threat. Those who commit these acts have no friends. And the proof is, I believe, that they were able to operate comfortably in certain countries a few years ago, and today they are attacking those very same countries. We must not hide behind our little finger, thinking that just because we are more or less comfortable, we can escape this threat. I want to express my full solidarity with all the countries of the Sahel and all the countries affected by this terrorism. I believe Nigeria has been experiencing this for quite some time now with an internal movement. Many other countries as well, and increasingly countries like Benin, Togo, and so on. Senegal is also threatened by this phenomenon. Maybe for now it is more difficult, but I know that in the strategy of these groups, no country should think it will be spared. I also want to congratulate and pay tribute to the people of Burkina Faso for their resilience, because it is not easy to face an asymmetric threat. The difficulty is that we are not facing conventional armies, so we cannot wage a conventional war as our traditional armies are used to. We are facing an asymmetric threat, which is extremely difficult and requires us to constantly reinvent ourselves by prioritizing other methods of anticipation. We also want to offer our condolences for all the human lives lost. The loss of human lives, both civilian and military, is painful. That being said, I believe there were initiatives. They were too slow. The responsiveness shown in political crisis is not the same, in any case, as when facing this scourge. That we have to acknowledge. I believe there was the standby intervention force that ECOWAS set up with a certain number of personnel, as well as equipment allocations and budget contributions to be able to respond. And I believe that this standby force is still on standby and wants to intervene. Was it slow? I think so, yes, because when there is a political problem in a country, ECOWAS usually reacts quickly. Except that in the case of my country, Senegal, we didn't hear from ECOWAS because we ourselves were being persecuted and I was in prison. We went through a lot and we didn't hear anything from ECOWAS. I think it's maybe only when there are coup d'etat that it reacts quickly. That being said, for me, it's never too late. Even in the current situation, whether the AS is on the side or not, the rest of ECOWAS, some ECOWAS countries are being hit by terrorism today. Terrorism knows no borders. It doesn't recognize countries. It doesn't recognize the AES entity or the ECOWAS entity. It strikes wherever it can. So here is an area of cooperation between the AES and the rest of ECOWAS that must continue to be implemented. But for that to happen, the parties need to come together and keep talking. It's not the end of the world that 3 countries have decided to organize themselves into a confederation, but they are neighboring countries to ECOWAS member states. Discussions need to resume, and we need to come together around security issues. I say that Africa has 2 problems that manifest differently depending on the country. These are the security problem and the economic problem. In the case of Burkina, the difficulty is that we have to combine the imperative of economic revival, and I commend everything that is being done in terms of the agricultural revolution and so on. But at the same time, we also have to confront this threat, which is very difficult. And I think that African countries in general, but especially the ECOWAS region, must organize themselves to face it. I would like to remind you that people forget that the oldest military dispute in Africa is actually found in our country, in Casamance, which is my homeland. For decades, we have lived through this situation. It is not completely resolved, but we are doing what is necessary. We have lived through this situation. We did not receive any assistance. We did not have any collaboration that would have allowed us to deal with it. It was very painful and very difficult for Senegal. That is why I understand today what some countries are going through. Even so, over there, it was less serious because it was a localized demand. But what you are facing is not localized. It has no territory. And from that point on, I agree with you that the ECOWAS authorities must now come together with those of the AES around these essential issues and ask, what can we do together to curb this phenomenon?
All right. So perhaps we can talk about the cooperation between Senegal and France, since we are nearing the end of this interview. So what is the current state of this cooperation?
It is like all the other cooperations. There is no exception or specificity. I'm not going to elaborate too much because I'm not here to talk about France in the sense that that might be giving you something you don't want, which is what we're going to do, giving special emphasis to one collaboration compared to many others. I think we have moved past the stage where one country, regardless of the history that may have connected us in the past and continues to connect us, where one country receives all our attention. We consider France to be a partner like any other. We have nothing against it, and we are taking actions as a sovereign nation. Every single day, as God gives us, we take actions as a sovereign nation, not because we have grievances against anyone in particular, but because that is how a country should operate once it calls itself independent. Earlier, I mentioned the example of military bases, which in this case are specifically French, because it is the only country that had military bases here. That being said, aside from these considerations, we have relations with France, just as we do with Burkina Faso, with Mali, with the United States, and with China. These are normal, ordinary relations. Perhaps the relationship between Senegal and France has not developed in the same way as it has between Burkina Faso and France, or between another country and France. And this is where each country must adapt according to its own past, but above all, its present. And we recognize every country's right to make its own choices. It is necessary, it is imperative, because here I am addressing a certain African audience because we often fight the wrong battles. We need to move away from an attitude where it's all or nothing. We have been divided for long enough, and sometimes over trivial matters. Today the goal is to bring together all Pan-Africanists, all sovereigntists, to unite them around the struggle for Africa's liberation, for Africa to reclaim its natural resources, all of its potential, to win the real battles, those of security and the fight for economic and social development. And this morning, we had a long discussion with President Traoré, whom I consider both a friend and a brother. President Traoré, and I used to talk when I was in the opposition and he had just come to power. But there may be some elements on which Depending on the specificities of each country, people do not have the same positions. These should not become points that cause people to dig in on their positions. Because if we look at the points of convergence, they make up 95%. Burkina is Burkina. Senegal is Senegal. Côte d'Ivoire is Côte d'Ivoire. Another country is another country. And I repeat, we, Senegal, our struggle, beyond the differences that exist, which we can understand, is to do everything possible to bring together the sons and daughters of Africa around strong common goals in order to face the rest of the world and to go out and conquer the world. And if we want to do that, we need to show selflessness and mutual tolerance on these matters. No one is more Pan-African than anyone else. People adapt according to the context. When we raised the issue of sovereignty and when we fought the battle, it's been 10 years since we started as opponents. Anonymous, unknown. 10 years ago, if you had mentioned Songo, Burkina, people would have asked you, isn't that just Burkina Faso? Or isn't that a Zongo that was turned into a Songo over there? We made our own way and we remained consistent and steadfast. Let's avoid divisive factors over trivial details and let's focus on what truly matters. This, not because we came to power through democratic means, that we are not revolutionaries. It's not because we came to power by other means that we are more revolutionary than others, and vice versa. Some people were idolized. They came to power by force of arms. They were idolized because they achieved results. Some people came to power through the ballot box and they were overthrown because they didn't deliver results. Our ability to serve our people in Africa, and that's important. We often appreciate this detail. Burkina Faso is like a homeland to me. I've always had a great admiration for Burkina Faso. I spend, when I entertain myself, it's the Burkina films I watch, like Le Curé, Ladi, and others, because that's my kind of entertainment. And I really appreciate the Burkinabe people for their integrity, their education, their originality, for remaining the same people. I like that a lot. This country, its originality. And I believe that Senegal and Burkina Faso have more ties than they themselves realize. That's why I made a point of being here for the memory of President Thomas Sankara, but also to reaffirm this strong relationship between our two countries. And that under His Excellency's presidency, we want to make this connection, Ouagadougou-Dakar, a very strong axis. The rest is just politics. ACE is the important things that matter to us. We are going to strengthen our relations with Burkina Faso, with Mali, with Niger, and with all the other countries, because that is what we believe in.
All right. So, last question, Mr. Prime Minister. You are here for the Thomas Sankara Mausoleum. Today, what message you have for the African youth?
First of all, simply a message of unity. Shukra Kilia. I don't want to use the term, but when I look at what is happening these days, I feel like Africa is more divided than ever, especially at its most essential segment, its youth. Africa's youth is its strength. We need to turn this youth not into a burden, but into a dividend, demographic dividend. This youth must be at the forefront of the Pan-African struggle, the struggle for unity. Pan-Africanism doesn't mean that one day we'll all be a single country now. But it means making this continent a free, coherent space for every African and raising it to the level it deserves. Because I tend to say that the 21st century should belong to Africa. This is our century. It's the only continent that still has such significant potential. China, over the past 30 years, has been the engine of global growth, and now it's running out of steam. Now it should be Africa's turn. Of course, we need to address the issue of security, I agree with you. But we also need to talk a lot to our youth so that we don't mistake who the real enemy is. The hostility that sometimes exists between people, even over a small football match, it's as if it's a world war among our youth. I think today our young people need to understand that they must be at the forefront of this unity. There may be political problems between political leaders, but not between the people. No African people hate another African people. And often, within the same people, the actions taken by governments, by those in power, are disapproved of. Some even go so far as to hold demonstrations to support those they sympathize with. It's a message of unity, a message of rising above differences. We need to understand that none of our countries can move forward without the others. That's an illusion. So even if a country can develop, if it is well managed, stable, and does what is necessary, it can develop, but it will never become a power. Because to be a power, you need territory, you need a population. When I say territory, I mean a vast territory. The West African region covers 6,500,000 square kilometers, less than China, which has 8,900,000, and less than the United States, which has almost 9 million. You need a population. Burkina Faso has 25 or 27 million inhabitants. Senegal has 18 million. Those aren't markets. China has 1,300,000,000. That's why it can withstand even the attacks it faces. We have this shared destiny. We need to understand that and not add fuel to the fire. My hope is that everyone talks to each other, that we try to move beyond this situation and help each other out. Where Senegal has problems that Burkina Faso doesn't, Burkina Faso should be there to help, and vice versa. This is the message I want to give to the youth. But obviously, the political elite also needs to rise to the occasion. The political elite must be up to the task and move beyond these pointless conflicts, move beyond. Africa is actually under attack. We talked earlier about terrorism. But, Mr. Boubacar, where do the weapons these people use come from? Do you know how much a drone costs? Do you even know how much a Kalashnikov costs? Where do these weapons come from? There are people who are giving them these weapons, but by doing so, they're not just attacking Burkina, they're attacking all of Africa. And we need a collective response to these kinds of threats. And we need to be able to identify, I'll say it again. And this is where I'll conclude it. Security and economic development. Unfortunately, we waste a lot of time on political debates.
Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for granting us this interview. It was truly our pleasure. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for watching this interview with the Prime Minister of Senegal, Ousmane Sonko. Stay tuned to RTB's programming. Good evening.
Thank you so much, families, for listening. I'm not going to repeat anything, but for me, what I've taken is it doesn't want us to bring division among us. Democratic elected, it doesn't mean that they are not fighting for the same cause. You can choose your path, but if you are on the same path, hopefully you will succeed. They are ready to support the AES at all costs. At least they are not like the other countries, Benin, Ivory Coast, and the rest. So we wait and see how this will go. Sometimes I feel sorry for them because I heard some time ago that their money is all gone in the hands of their masters, and that's why the president has been going in and out. I don't follow those news very often, but I've taken everything that they have said in. What I'm doing here is I'm fighting for our future children. That's all. That's all that I'm doing here. Hopefully one day they will come and listen and know what really went down. I don't want to tell stories. I want them to hear it from the horse's mouth. That's all. Our English speaking children, or even grown-ups, grandpas, grandmas, aunties, uncles. That's what I'm here for. And so we want Africa to unite. He spoke well, and I hope, I'm sure he mean every word. But you can tell they still have ropes at the back of them that is pulling them. It's up to the fittest if they can pull faster and harder to liberate themselves completely. Because without that, it won't happen. That's all I can think of. That's all I was feeling, because all the 3 hours speech, interview that we heard or we are about to hear from President General Abdurrahmani Tiani, they're not going to leave them alone. No. And not only them, Once they are working there, they are working in other countries. And Kenya should be smiling now. Next year, next 2 years, it's not a case. But that's something that will happen. I share a video. I just remember I shared a video before when one of the generals visit Kenya, and that person was handing over a note to one of the army officers. I will look for that video. I said something in that video, and it's like my feelings or what I said is happening with this visit that just came up. Anyway, I'll leave you here, families. Credit to our TB News Faso 7. They should keep fighting. My VIPs, my kings and queens, thank you so much for your support and your encouragement. Thank you for your time. God bless you all.